Colonel. One of the most important nominations by President Trump was to name freedom fighter Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. That's right, but the country's gain was the Senate's loss. Now, fortunately, the man who took his place is a champion to gun owners across the country. For the past 6 years, he served as the Attorney General of Alabama. In that role, he became a national leader in protecting our rights in the courts. And now he continues to be a giant, literally, in the fight to protect your rights in the U.S. Senate. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Alabama Senator Luther Strange.
Thank you so much, Chris. To adjust this microphone a little bit, I'm the newest senator, taking the place of my dear friend Jeff Sessions. But I am the tallest senator in the history of the United States at 6 feet 9 inches tall. And sometimes these microphones don't exactly fit me. But I am so glad to be here. I want to thank you all for taking the stand that you're taking and allowing me to be here as you defend the Second Amendment. I want to thank, again, Chris. He's been a dear friend of mine for many years. He works tirelessly across the country, not just in Washington, but in the state capitals across this country. And I can't thank him enough for his friendship. It's no secret, I hope, to you that Alabamians like Jeff Sessions and me and others believe in and uphold the Second Amendment. We have a proud tradition in our state, and I'd like to offer a special acknowledgement and thanks to my Birmingham neighbor, Jim Porter, who's sitting here in the front row, for his strong leadership as a board member and president of this organization. Jim, thank you. Well, like many of you, I was raised in a simple home with loving parents around lots of firearms. As a young boy, it never seemed odd to me that we lived that way. It was just a normal way to grow up. But I guess as I've grown older, I realized that not all Americans grew up that way, and many of them disdain the way we were raised and the way we raised our children. They seem to fail to grasp that gun ownership is more than just a right in the Constitution. You see, the guns in our house, whether they were rifles or pistols or shotguns, and my grandmother had a .38 special she gave to me too, just like Colonel West, so I know what he's talking about. They were really a reflection of our great American attitude of self-reliance and of individual responsibility, something I believe in very strongly. Every day they send a message that will not submit to the supervision of the government. If someone had invaded our home when I was a child, there was never some consideration that my father would call and wait around for the police to come to the rescue. Not that that was a reflection on our great men and women in the police department, but we would protect ourselves. It was an act of self-reliance and individual responsibility. And both are too uncommon in our society today. I know you've heard from our speakers earlier this afternoon that the right to keep and bear arms is the last defense against tyranny, and that's true. At face value, that implies that when all else fails, this right will ensure all the other rights that we enjoy. When we can't speak freely, when we can't assemble freely, when we can't practice our faith, it's the right to keep and bear arms that allows us to push back, even to the point of returning fire. Is it not ironic that every left-wing government in Western history has sought to disarm its people and establish a monopoly on firepower, whether it's the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Venezuela has been mentioned earlier. Oppressive socialist governments have systematically disarmed the civilian populace. If we're meant to remain a free people, we need to understand that the values of self-reliance and responsibility must be constantly instilled in our children, enshrined in our educational system, and defended at every turn. So the Second Amendment is not just a right inserted in there with 9 other amendments to the Constitution. It's a solemn responsibility ingrained in the fibers, the very fibers that make this country great. By the grace of God, none of us were alive to see a time when Americans were compelled to rise up against tyranny on our own soil. For us, the struggles of the War of Independence can only be imagined. But for our founding fathers, they were very real and very recent memory. And so we have a responsibility to honor and commemorate the time when this right was paid for in blood by our ancestors. As they gathered in Philadelphia back in 1787, the representatives of the new United States understood firsthand that rights could disappear overnight because they had seen it. They had seen the intolerable acts of 1774 sweep away the right to assemble and the guarantee of a fair trial. A year later, they had lost friends and countrymen at the battles of Lexington and Concord. When the founders codified the right to bear arms, they knew full well what it meant. We have a responsibility to ensure that their sacrifices and this original intent are honored and upheld. In 2017, we also have the responsibility as sportsmen and enthusiasts to set an example of responsible gun ownership that is worthy of our founding fathers. As a sportsman myself, I know that hunting's not just a hobby, it's a way of life. It certainly is in my home state of Alabama, and it's an attitude of all free people. As much as the critics of gun rights would like the American people to believe otherwise, gun ownership brings with it a sense of responsibility. Now, I grew up, like I know most of you did, learning how to shoot with my grandfather and my father. I in the beautiful national forest and private lands of Alabama. For the first time, I was taught to handle a gun. I was taught a reverence and appreciation for the natural wonders that we enjoyed and that the power those weapons represented. So when you're raised to appreciate safe, responsible gun ownership, you learn lessons. I remember coming home from hunting, or probably more often than not with my dad, to the shooting range, which is where he liked to enjoy himself. When I was a kid, he would sit down on his workbench in his study, and he would load his own ammunition. I'm afraid that might be becoming more of a lost art, reloading your own ammunition, but it was something that I just took for granted because my dad did it practically every night. I'm sure, knowing my father and his frugal ways, that he did it to save a few dollars, but I think he was also, as I think back on it, engaging in a ritual, sort of a habit of readiness that had been passed down to him. And we have a responsibility to ensure that those rituals endure. Of course, we sportsmen are called upon to be voluntary stewards of the Second Amendment, and gun owners everywhere are called upon to exercise their rights for the safety of their communities, and we have a responsibility to enforce those who do. But it's easy, and I've seen this as Attorney General, now as a senator, to talk the talk on gun rights, but not everyone's ready to walk the walk. Here today, you all know too well that there is not any time, despite our success, to be complacent. Across our country, the stand your ground laws we rely on when protecting ourselves and our communities are under fire. In Alabama, we fought to ensure that private citizens are not punished for taking responsible action. It was just 1 year ago yesterday, that a young man, Chris Gaither, was at home alone in a small town in our neighboring state, my home state of Alabama, Talladega, Alabama, when a burglar broke into his house, started stealing their possessions, and began to threaten young Chris in the process. Chris was an enterprising young man and got hold of his parents' 9mm and shot the intruder in the leg. That allowed the police to come and take him into custody. So when it comes to giving your family peace of mind, you shouldn't have to fight a legal battle over a situation like that. Fortunately, Chris didn't have to fight a legal battle, thanks to the work of the people in this room and the NRA. But had he been in another state, that might not have been the case. When the need arises, we have a responsibility to exercise this right of self-protection. For 6 years, I was the Attorney General of Alabama. You heard from Adam Laxalt earlier. He's a great friend of mine, another great defender of the Second Amendment. It was my job to fight the overwhelming regulatory agenda aimed at the Second Amendment and other fundamental freedoms coming from the Obama administration. And it was a wonderful job. My friend Greg Abbott, who was the Attorney General at the time, and he's now the great governor of Texas, used to tell the old story. He said, well, we have the best job in America. We conservative attorneys general, we get to wake up every morning and figure out how we're going to sue the Obama administration. That, fortunately, is not a problem that we have to worry about today. but it was a problem for 6, 8 long years. But it's not it's a humorous story that Greg used to tell, but it was a sad story too, that we would have to do that. Because when it came to the rights to keep and bear arms and defending the Second Amendment, Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch did not make it easy for us to defend the Constitution. But along with our fellow AGs, we took every opportunity to act, and we were successful. I'll just point out one example to pick on New York. New York passed something called the SAFE Act. You'll remember this back in 2014. I was fortunate enough to be picked to take the lead on writing and filing a brief. 21 of my colleagues joined that, challenging that law in federal court, defending the state of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association against that unlawful order. And there are many, many other examples of that. Now I'm here and I'm preaching to the choir. I'm really here to say thank you. But you know these rights that we have come with it a responsibility at the highest levels of government. Your involvement lets the government know how you feel. And believe you me, to be standing here and following President of the United States, Donald Trump, is the perfect example and culmination of all the work you've done. And I want to thank you for that, because it literally has changed the course of our country. So thank you. Give yourselves a hand for that. As a United States Senator and as a former Attorney General who fought the battles against the Obama administration, I couldn't be more excited to be working with President Trump. He is a fantastic individual who says what he means what he says. He's back here this year. I was here with him last year when he came. In the midst of that campaign, the National Rifle Association, the people of this room were the determining factor in ensuring that he got the momentum to carry him into the White House. I was there to see it. I was an Attorney General. Now I'm in the United States Senate. I was able to vote with my friend David Perdue and my friend Ted Cruz to confirm Neil Gorsuch to the United States Supreme Court. That is a generational appointment, and there will be more to come. And I couldn't be prouder to have cast that vote. Just stay tuned. There is more to come. The other thing I've got to say, because I'm standing in the shoes of Jeff Sessions, who was Attorney General years before me. He inspired me to get involved in politics. He's a person of principle, of integrity, who believes in the rule of law. And he has been willing to stand up, whether it's the border wall, whether it's illegal immigration, whether it's simply enforcing the rule of law, which is, I don't have to tell this group, but I say it whenever I can. The rule of law in the Constitution undermines every single right we have, not just the Second Amendment, every liberty and freedom we enjoy in this country. Men and women of armed services, law enforcement, have died to preserve those rights. You're here today defending them. And Jeff Sessions embodies that. He is going to be a great Attorney General. He already is a great Attorney General. But it's not just Jeff. President Trump has nominated other great people to serve in his cabinet. You saw Secretary Zinke. Couldn't be a finer person in the world to be the Interior Secretary. My colleague, Scott Pruitt, was the Attorney General of Oklahoma, a fantastic Second Amendment supporter who is now the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, one of the most overbearing federal agencies we have. I joined with him in more than 24 lawsuits against the EPA. Now he's running it, and I can promise you he is going to clean up that mess. Believe me. We're not wasting any time in Congress, and I just want to say how much I appreciate the conservative leadership we have and my friends in the Senate who have welcomed me. One of the first actions we took as I looked around as a new senator, what can I do to support the Second Amendment? What can I do to empower law-abiding men and women in this country to the right to keep and bear arms and to enjoy their sportsmanship and hunting and so forth, self-defense? And so I eagerly jumped at the opportunity to co-sponsor the Constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. I'm very familiar with the need. That law is critically necessary. As Attorney General and a person that defended our citizens' right to keep and bear arms, I promise you I will be a champion for that legislation, and we're going to get it done. So please continue what you're doing. I cannot overestimate the importance of your presence here, the significance of what you're doing. The future of our right to keep and bear arms is going to depend on how we defend ourselves against complacency. We cannot become complacent. 2018 will be here before we know it. And believe me, the Democratic Party and people who are opposed to the Second Amendment, as you've seen in elections here in Georgia and other places, are anxious to fight back. They, I don't think, have still come to terms with the fact that we have President Trump in the White House and he's getting things done. So don't be complacent. Please don't be complacent. So let's get to work. Freedom's not free, as you know. Don't submit to the government. We don't want them to think or act for us. Let's think and act for ourselves. Let's continue to stay involved. I want to thank you so much. God bless you. God bless America. And thank you so much for your support. Thank you very much.